Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Luanne Rife, who is the Executive Director of Cardinal News, and Dwayne Yancey, who is the Executive Editor of Cardinal News. If this is not a newspaper you've heard about, it might be because it's less than a year old. It started in the summer of 2021. They are doing remarkable journalism. I am a subscriber, which is why we are hosting this show, so that you can understand how you can be a subscriber too, and why it matters to have this kind of journalism. It's focused on Southwest Virginia and Southside Virginia, but it impacts everyone in Virginia. Thank you both so much for being here, Luanne and Dwayne. I was an early subscriber. I have to say, I found out about Cardinal News on Pod Virginia, which is a wonderful podcast. And Dwayne, you were actually on there explaining what Cardinal News was. And I'm like, this sounds like something, that would be illuminating. So I was an early subscriber. And I have been an evangelist, as anyone who follows me on social media knows. I am an evangelist for Cardinal News. So I'm going to start with you, Luanne. You're the executive director, which is unusual for a newspaper, except the fact that you're a 501c3 is also unusual for a digital online newspaper. So give us a little background on how Cardinal News came together in the summer of 2021.
Mm-hmm. So back in April of last year, both Dwayne and I worked at the Roanoke Times. Both of us had been there for a number of years and had watched as there had been some devastating cuts to staff during the past decade or so. And we were up for another round of really drastic cuts. And both of our jobs were safe, and we probably could have stayed there for a few years and retired. But following the announcement that 9 more staffers would be leaving, we were told that there would be so few bodies left that we could no longer do any in-depth reporting. And that's the space that I lived in. And that's what the Roanoke Times had been known for throughout this country for many, many years. And with that going, I took an early retirement buyout. Right after that, I was approached by the Secular Society. It's a nonprofit in Blacksburg that's very concerned about the state of newspapers. Had asked me to look at what it would take to create an online news organization. And it didn't take long to find out that there were a number of other people who were interested in doing that, including the business community that felt as though stories about business and the economy weren't getting out about Southwest and Southside Virginia. So that's how we got our start.
So both of you have like 4 decades of experience, and Luanne, you with a lot of newspapers, and Dwayne, you have spent a lot of time at the Roanoke Times. And because I'm from that area and I went to high school in Roanoke County, I can tell you, the Roanoke Times was the newspaper on my doorstep since before I was born, in Galax and in Christiansburg and in Vinton. And so I could see it too. The fact that they were trimming the number of reporters, the fact that the Roanoke Times building in downtown Roanoke got sold. I mean, you could kind of see the writing on the wall. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, well, what's going to happen in Southwest Virginia if you don't have quality, in-depth journalism? And it just felt to me another way in which Southwest Virginia gets blown off as not mattering to people in the rest of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so the fact that you have committed yourself to producing quality journalism and sharing it digitally so it's accessible to everyone, to me, is something that needs to be celebrated. So, Dwayne, I remember from your talking on Pod Virginia about what you hope to do. You really, I think, wanted everyone in Virginia to understand, when we look at what happens in Richmond and who comes to Richmond and how public policy gets made, a lot of times people don't understand this great divide that's west of Richmond. And you have often said in your articles, Dwayne, that you are not partisan. You're not this, you're not that. And I love that about you, that you're a Virginian, and what you write about is about Virginia and the people who live where you live. So tell us a little bit about what was the first edition? I mean, how did you actually roll out this thing? What did that look like, Dwayne?
Well, I guess since we're online, we don't really think in terms of editions. We've had to unlock our thinking from the old print ways. We have no deadlines. There are no deadlines in the online world because the deadline is whenever you push the publish button. We are no longer, wedded to some hulking machine somewhere, printing press that has a deadline.
So there's fresh content all the time. And how do you decide on what stories? You've got contributing reporters out there in the world. How do people decide what it is they want to write about? Because some of these articles, when I say in depth, I want people to understand the article you did on Pound, Virginia took me as much time to read as anything in the New Yorker or Atlantic Magazine. Like, that is what in-depth journalism is. You sit with something and you realize that a reporter has spent an inordinate amount of time talking to people, not just writing it, but actually talking to people and bringing forward history so that you understand the point of the article. So how do reporters, what is your methodology for bringing the stories?
Well, I suppose the first thing to know is we are not a newspaper in a different form. We are not trying to replicate what newspapers used to do. We are trying to fill the gap that they have left. So if you think of a newspaper as a department store with, lots of, different departments that it's covering, I tell people we're more like a specialty store, one of the out parcels at the mall. So we are trying to do a few things and a few things well. So there are a lot of things we don't cover by design. We don't cover,
weddings, funerals, engagement announcements.
Yeah, I mean, there are still newspapers. They can do those. Our mission is to fill the void that they've left. So the three main things we focus on are the politics, economy, and culture of Southwest and Southside Virginia. Politics, because Luanne described one breaking point. The breaking point for me was at the same time, it was something different. When the Roanoke Times decided it would no longer have a full-time political reporter. And the idea that we were going to pick up all of our political coverage from, Richmond was just anathema to me. They may do fine work, but they're not covering our legislators or our issues. So, one of our goals was to have a full-time political reporter in the state capitol. We're the only news organization west of Richmond with a full-time reporter in Richmond. The other thing is, a business reporter, our economy coverage. The big story in Southwest and Southside Virginia, these are two parts of the state that are in the process of reinventing their economies. They are both very different regions culturally, but they have one thing in common, which is they've both seen their traditional employers either decline or die altogether. Be that coal in Southwest, tobacco and textiles across Southside. So the central organizing principle for us in economy coverage is how these regions are reinventing their economies. So we want to be very laser focused on that. The culture part is, that's, this is who we are. This is why, we think this part of the state is worth living in. So that's a long answer to your question, but we're trying to be very narrowly focused on just a handful of things.
So I noticed that Beth Macy is on your advisory committee, because
Yeah.
all your board members are on your website, and I encourage people to go to cardinalnews.org and really understand you're a brand new online digital news agency. And like you said, it's not really a newspaper. I don't even know like the word you use to describe it. But Beth Macy, when she wrote Factory Man, really described back in the day when the economic engine of Virginia was furniture manufacturing. And obviously it was coal. And one of the things about that book is that people who live in Northern Virginia, for instance, when the engine of the economy became government contractors, because we're a suburb of Washington, D.C., people don't understand that economic engines can move around because we don't teach the economic history. I mean, we don't even bother with trying to teach kids in school the history of Virginia other than battles and battlefields and wars. We don't teach them how Virginia evolved from cotton and tobacco to coal and furniture manufacturing, and the fact that there will always be an evolution taking place. And that's what I love about the articles that you're writing about Southwest Virginia and Southside. When you write articles on, the surprising income to counties versus the outgo, that was a fantastic article. No one's writing that. The decline in community college enrollment, why is that? I mean, you kind of upend things that people assume they know, or you upend things that people, take at face value because no one's actually gone out there and done the deep reporting on this. So Luanne, I know that you're also the chief development officer for this nonprofit news agency. I don't know what to call you. So what I don't know what to call you. You're beyond description.
There are a lot of hats. But before we move on, Catherine, I just wanted to point out, that newspapers or news organizations like we are the new kind of newspaper, right? In the digital form, have always, told the stories that, chronicle current events that become history, just the thing that you're saying. And going back to Beth, Factory Man started as a story that she did for the Roanoke Times.
I know.
So did Dope Stick.
Yes.
All of that. And that's the kind of reporting that isn't being done anymore by the legacy newspapers. And, and we just, as Dwayne had said, we identified right off the bat that politics and the economy and, culture, the loosely who we are and what we are, were the kind of stories that we needed to tell. But right now, there's just this urgent need because there are very few to none health reporters in Virginia or education reporters in Virginia. I mean, there used to be, and now there's just one or two of each type. So, those are important stories that matter a lot to everyone, the big issues that are not getting covered.
You're absolutely right, because I subscribe to the Rural Health podcast out of which is out of Southwest Virginia, but not everybody listens to podcasts either. I'm surprised when even Pod Virginia, I was at dinner the other night and I'm like, with a legislator from Northern Virginia. And I'm like, do you listen to Pod Virginia? And she's like, what? And so in some ways, what you're doing is very accessible. People know the internet. People know how to go to a URL. They're used to reading things online, more so even than people are used to listening to podcasts. But the Rural Health podcast, to your point, is trying to raise up issues that people need to understand. Healthy communities are so important. And I love the fact that you're kind of doing this in-depth reporting. And you sent me a map earlier, Luanne. It was a bubble map that showed me where your subscribers are in Virginia. And you've got huge numbers of subscribers like in Richmond, and you've got subscribers in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And looking at the map, you remarked that you would never even know where you were based on where people are reading you every day, which is remarkable. It really is a testament to the quality of what you're writing. So when you go forward, and talk to people about funding, for instance, I'm assuming that surely there must be grants or there must be funding out there to do what you're doing. What do you sort of explain to people about what you're doing and why that any grantor would be making an excellent investment in what you're doing?
I'm sorry, Catherine. My screen froze up for a moment and I missed your question.
Well, my question was like when you talk to funding organizations, because you are a 501c3, one assumes I would like to see you get some sort of gigantic grant from some huge organization going, they're doing what everyone should be doing. But so how do you kind of talk to people when you're like, we're a nonprofit, we're an online news organization, and this is what we're trying to do. How do you kind of describe the benefit or the importance of what you're doing to people who are potential funders for what you're doing?
That's a really good question, because when we started out and started doing this, we found we went to some people that we thought would be able to help support us and get us launched. And no one was asking us, why are you doing this?
Wow.
We went in and we told them what we wanted to do, and they said, well, what's your plan and how much is it going to cost? And again, when we go out and talk to people, no one is saying, why are you doing this? Because everyone sees the great need to do it. And so basically, we looked at different models, and the model that seemed to work the best for organizations like us, because we're not inventing the wheel, it's already there. We had conversations with the Institute for Nonprofit News and with Lion, and found that the most successful model is exactly what we're doing, this nonprofit based on public broadcasting model, where we offer free access. Anybody and everybody can read us all day, any day, because we don't want price to be a barrier to knowledge. But in the same sense, it takes a lot of money to keep this organization running. So we ask for donations and support, just the same as public TV does and public radio does. And then we also go out and try and talk with major funders to get larger support. We recently received a gift from the Fishburne family that had owned the last local owners of the Roanoke Times, and we're just thrilled and honored to have their support. So, again, no one's asking us why we're doing this. They're asking us, how can you do more? And so we're working on that.
Well, what I love about Cardinal News as well is it's so easy to share your articles online, because I have a subscription to the Richmond Times-Dispatch and I have a subscription to the Roanoke Times. And the thing about when those come up in the morning in my email, they're the same, because, the same owner, they slim it down, they repurpose things, but they're paywalls. And so at least with the Washington Post, if I want to share an article, it's like you have 10 gift articles. And so you can click a button and you can post it so other people can read it without running into this. You have to have a subscription. And Cardinal News isn't like that. You've got quality articles. They're very interesting. They're very well written. And I can post them anywhere, on Twitter, on Facebook. And when people click it, they are not getting this thing that says you have to be a subscriber or you've got 3 free articles left. And to me, just like you were saying, public television is that model, that anybody can tune into public television. Anyone can read the journalism, the content that you are producing. And as I said, I think some of what you're producing is just, I don't see it anywhere else. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dwayne, but when you did a deep dive into the counties and the number of people during the pandemic who were moving in versus the ones who had demised, and the fact that there were some surprises there, even though it's not easily apparent why that movement was. It's like, I don't see that anywhere else. And yet it's important to all of Virginia, because the pandemic produced a situation where people could work remotely from anywhere. And I have made the observation that people like me who left Southwest Virginia, and many people have left Southwest Virginia, now you can work for any company and move back to your hometown. And so your article about the counties, to me, was telling a very different story about what people thought about some of the counties in Southwest Virginia and Southside. How do you come up with this idea that you want to write about things like that?
Meg, I was hoping you weren't going to ask that, because I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, it just seemed an obvious thing to do.
But it's not obvious to everyone, Dwayne. It's just not obvious. People are spoon-fed bite-sized pieces of 3-minute reads, and they don't. I think most people do not think deeply. I think deeply about many things, and I guess maybe that's what's drawn me to Cardinal News, is that I see it resonates with me that you are thinking deeply about things people should care about, because they impact the economy, not just where you are, but for all of Virginia. I have said, and you have written about this, is that people can come back to the counties where their parents are aging and bring their salaries from corporate America with them. One of the big announcements from the CEO of Airbnb was that his 6,000 employees could work from wherever they wanted to, and he was not going to adjust anyone's pay for where they lived. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, hallelujah. If more companies would do that, what would that mean for people going back to where they came from? Mm-hmm. And so when I saw your article on the counties, I'm like, why aren't more people writing about this? Why aren't more people talking about the opportunities that exist, in areas of Virginia where people have left mainly because of jobs?
Well, one reason is there are just fewer journalists. Mm-hmm. The Roanoke Times is probably a third the size of what it was, not long ago. You see similar numbers, at other papers. And many of the journalists who remain, when you look at the legacy news sites, they are, they're having to spend all their time, chasing fires and wrecks and shootings, and there's no time for any kind of in-depth reporting. That is what we are here for. We, as Luanne said, we've got invented some new form of journalism. We're just doing what used to be the practice years ago, and people have forgotten about it because they haven't seen it for a while.
Well, because Luanne, you had mentioned about Beth Macy doing the series on the opioid epidemic, which I read that series, mm-hmm. and then it became Dope Sick, and then it became a Hulu special, and all of this from the genesis of someone doing the kind of reporting that you do every day at Cardinal News. Mm-hmm. There was recently a 3-part series the Richmond Times-Dispatch did on the governor's school there in Jackson Ward. And it was a great 3-part series, and I couldn't share it because unless you have a subscription to the Richmond Times-Dispatch, no one could read it. So people are like, oh, great article, but I can't read it. And I'm like, oh, and it's so frustrating to me because this is the things people need to understand and they need to care about. And so the visuals, I have to say, it's not only the journalism, but for any of the viewers, go to their website and look at the photos that come with their articles. I give you all huge thumbs up for really, whether it's Pound Virginia or the article about quilts or the one on immigration, which was great. The photos that you managed to find, it seems to me, and I am not a journalist, but it seems to me it takes a lot of time and effort and research before you ever sit down to write the thing, to do the investigative journalism. And so looking at the number of people you have and the content you're producing, mm-hmm. it's pretty remarkable to me.
Imagine what we could do if we had more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Everything you're seeing, we're doing with 2 reporters.
That's incredible.
We do have a lot of freelancers, but in terms of, reporters on staff, we have, 2 full-time reporters on staff, one in Richmond, one in Roanoke. So, I told people everything you're seeing, we were doing with 1 reporter west of Richmond.
Well, it was funny on the one that you did on immigration, which is fascinating because my grandfather is an immigrant who came through Ellis Island in June of 1913 and ended up in Roanoke. So he followed the railroad to Roanoke and worked for Norfolk Southern Railway before he opened his own produce brokerage on the Market. And it's that corner store right after you go over the pedestrian bridge from Hotel Roanoke. Mm-hmm. There on the corner store, he had a produce brokerage from the late 1920s until he died in 1958. And so I recently found on Ancestry.com a page where he applied for citizenship and, his Roanoke address. And I think that was like 1921. And so I am part of that immigrant story. And I was very attracted to you explaining why immigration looks the way it does in Southwest Virginia. There's not a lot of it there. So I posted the article on Twitter, and a friend of mine who lives in Roanoke and teaches high school in Botetourt County saw the article on Twitter, and she's like, this is fascinating. And I thought it was really funny that I'm sitting in Northern Virginia posting an article you produced in Southwest Virginia about Southwest Virginia. And my friend found it because this to me is like the magic of being digital and how people share information that otherwise they wouldn't find on their own.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, one, we love when people share our stories, and thank you for doing that. And I think it's really interesting that you're in Northern Virginia and you're sharing with someone who maybe hadn't heard about us, because
Right.
that's our largest challenge right now. Is that because we're new and because we're a startup, is getting our name out there and our brand out so that more people know about us. So we just love when people share on social media, let their friends know that we exist, because we found that once people know about Cardinal News, then they keep coming. They sign up for our morning newsletter. They become one of our donor members. And you've talked about the long form stories that we do. And that's another thing that Dwayne and I had been told in recent years is, people don't read long stories anymore. You just got to do these quick hits, put them up online and move on to the next thing. And we're thinking, but you believe that's what they're telling you with the metrics. Our metrics are showing a totally different story. People are reading, and they're reading to the end of our stories, and they're going on to another story, just like they do if you're reading a magazine.
Because I'm a longtime subscriber of the New Yorker and the Atlantic too,
Mm-hmm.
but the New Yorker recently has just had really great articles, and they're very long. I mean, you carve out an hour to read a New Yorker article, and that's what I want to read. That's the level of journalism I want to read. But the fact that we're producing it right here in Virginia, and it's homegrown, and it's about the Commonwealth of Virginia and the people who live here, I'm like, yowza. It doesn't get any better than that. The people out telling the story of the Commonwealth, the people who live here, and how we got here, which is, again, I'm amazed at the depth of your journalism in trying to help people understand we're here because this is what happened 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And people need to understand their history to understand how we got here. And I just don't get a sense that what people are taught in school or their own understanding of where they live, it helps them to grasp what we need to do when we talk about things like pivoting the economy in the coal fields. And you've done some amazing reporting around that. We're going to go to a short break. When we come back, I want our viewers to know that you're going to hear more about Cardinal News with Luanne Rife, who is the executive director, and Dwayne Yancey, who is the executive editor of this digital online news organization. So please join us after the break.
Caitlin, be serious. No, take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place, and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill, bring good home.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things.
2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks.
Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful,
The principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
You ready for the surprise?
Resuming moments like these starts with protecting our kids against COVID-19 and dangerous new variants.
Oh, you miss him.
Get the latest facts by visiting getvaccineanswers.org and speaking to your pediatrician or healthcare provider.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining us tonight is Luanne Rife and Dwayne Yancey. They are with Cardinal News, a digital online news organization based in Southside and Southwest Virginia. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a huge fan of Cardinal News. I encourage everyone to go to cardinalnews.org, where there is no paywall, and you can see the amazing in-depth journalism being done by Virginians about Virginians. So, Dwayne, you obviously have a lot of experience with the Roanoke Times, but when I look at the map that you and Luanne sent about where your readership is, you have got an audience of readers spread all across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and people are reading you who may never have read you before in your 4 decades at the Roanoke Times. So, I mean, is this mind-blowing for you, or how do you feel about that?
It is mind-blowing. When we started Cardinal News last fall, our goal was to reach, we wanted to reach Southwest and Southside, obviously, and we hoped we might get, some little bit of attention in Richmond, the state capital. And almost right away, we discovered we had accidentally built this statewide audience. That I can assure you that was not the goal, but in the world of the internet where there are no barriers, that happened almost right away.
So there are 95 counties and 39 cities. I think there's 39 cities because Martinsville's no longer a city, correct?
It's still a city.
They're going to be incorporated.
Town status, but
yeah. But see, that's the kind of things. If people read Cardinal News, they would know that we're losing a city that's being incorporated into a county and why. So let's show the map of where your readers are concentrated, because this is pretty astonishing to me.
Yeah, Luanne likes to say that if you look at that map, you can't really tell where we're based, that we have readers all over. And whenever I hear from people out of market, I always ask them, why are you reading us? And I usually get either one of two answers. Either one, they say, you're giving us a perspective of state government we're not getting any other place, which, okay, makes sense because we're covering it from, the perspective of Southwest and the Southside. So we're covering an entirely different set of issues. Or they say, you're telling us about a part of the state we know little to nothing about. We come from a part of the state that is easy to stereotype. When I was at the Roanoke Times, we kept a list of all the ways that out-of-town media would come to town and, write bad things about Roanoke and Southwest Virginia. In some cases, they might be factual descriptions, but, again, they were the easy stereotypes, and they were, part of the truth, but not the whole truth.
I remember reading something once, Dwayne, that it's not that stereotypes are incorrect, they're incomplete.
Yes, exactly.
They're incomplete. And so my grandmother was the first superintendent of public welfare for the city of Radford from 1936 to 1972. And she was a funny woman, could tell a funny story, but she would talk about going to Richmond for meetings, like, in the 40s and 50s. And people would actually ask her things like, well, do they wear shoes where you come from? And she'd say, well, only on Sundays. I mean, she just couldn't believe it. But she kind of laughed, and she'd laughed along with them because, coming from Radford again and going just to Richmond, and you wouldn't think that that's such a huge cultural shift, but it has been all along. And so what I love about the writing and the journalism that you're doing is that you really put faces and people and stories and history out where everybody can see it.
Well, there's a lot more going on than people realize. I mean, we have the U.S. Navy sending people to Danville, landlocked Danville, to learn shipbuilding trades because Danville has become a center for advanced manufacturing. We have the New River Valley that's growing the technology sector at such a fast rate. It's the third fastest growing metro for tech jobs in the country. We have a medical research institute in Roanoke that didn't exist not long ago, and now is an International Center for Brain Research, bringing in about $180 million of research dollars. I could go on and on. Our purpose is not to be a cheerleading site, but to tell the complete picture.
You're so right about that, because if you're not from the area, then you don't know that the largest employer in Roanoke Valley is Carilion. But that's actually why they started a medical college there, right? So Virginia Tech is there in Blacksburg, and you've got Radford, and you've got Roanoke College. And actually, people don't think of that as being a college town in the traditional sense of like Charlottesville, but there's actually wonderful universities in Southwest Virginia. And, having a medical college and having Carilion there and advancing this whole hub for medical research and medical training, that story needs to be told, because I don't know who else is telling it, not the Washington Post.
Well, that's part of our pitch, is no one else is telling that story. I mean, it used to be local media would tell that story, but local media has become so hollowed out, they don't have time to do that. Well,
this is
what we do.
Well, like I said, I encourage people to go and take a look. And so, Luanne, if you had more, you could do more, right? You two reporters, Dwayne's telling us, we're doing this with two full-time reporters. Think what we could do if we had more reporters and more people.
Right.
So what could you do, and what is your plan for trying to, increase the amount of resources you have to work with?
Right. So because we do everything, we always set all these audacious goals. Right from the start, we got up and running in a couple of months, and it usually takes organizations like us a couple of years to do that. So we have two campaigns going side by side right now, and one of them is being supported by a grant from Facebook, now Meta, who invited us early on to be part of their Reader Revenue Accelerator program, in which we we took a crash course in marketing because neither of us had that kind of background. So we have this campaign going that some of your viewers may see social media ads or requests from us, or we're using different tools to try and bring more readers to our site. And our goal is to quadruple the number of subscribers to our free morning newsletter by the end of September, the period of the goal. So while we're doing that, we're also trying to meet this great need for more stories, for more information. As I had mentioned earlier, I think we're down to one health reporter in covering, for Virginia, and she's based in Richmond. The Roanoke Times no longer has a K-12 or a higher ed reporter, and none of the other legacy newspapers in the area that we cover have either of those, any of that. So we see a great need to try and raise some major funding to support those two positions. And then because we're covering such a large region, we feel the need to have some reporters based like in far Southwest. We call the Bristol reporter, so that they can access all of the stories there. We will have a reporter based in Danville in July, and that's thanks to the Danville Regional Foundation that's supporting that position. We'd love to also have one in Lynchburg. We'd love to have one in the Roanoke, New River Valleys, and one in Martinsville. So we're trying to grow both our readership and our support at the same time. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us.
And that's what people don't realize. I'm going to just say, because you brought up Bristol, is the article that you did on casinos, which I thought was fantastic, because I'm not big on casinos, but I never considered it from the perspective of what great community partners they are in small towns and small cities. And again, that was such a great article. And it just put it into a whole different context and a whole different perspective that I had not considered before. And it also made me put it out there to say that people need to care about passenger rail service. The trains, man, the trains. And again, Dwayne, I'm looking at you because all of this is so interconnected, and you clearly see it. But you're writing, and people are reading elsewhere in Virginia who don't see it. They wouldn't see it unless you you brought it to them.
And just to give people a sense, your viewers a sense of scale. If they were to get in their car and drive from Northern Virginia to Roanoke, it might take maybe 3 hours, maybe 4, depending on traffic. You're still not even halfway to the end of the state, though. It's another 4 hours beyond Roanoke to get out to the Cumberland Gap. And it's a much harder 4 hours because there's no interstate after a while.
But people need to care about Bristol. Bristol straddles, there's a Tennessee side and there's a Virginia side. And the fact that Catherine Brill is somebody I used to know. Catherine was the mayor at Bristol several years ago. And we were talking about passenger train service because I was like, it needs to get to Roanoke and then it needs to get to Christiansburg. The first train ride I ever took, I was in 3rd grade, and I took it from the Christiansburg depot to Roanoke to go to the mall, Tanglewood. Oh, and so it's possible to do it. Like we had passenger service before, but to open up the southern part of that state via passenger rail service is so critical. And I want people everywhere in the Commonwealth of Virginia to understand the benefits to all of us, to get behind things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true, Catherine. Rail's really important. There are some road projects that are extremely important to our area that no one's really talking about. Air travel, if we want to build out our economic base, we need more space and more runways for even corporate jets. So these are things that when our region comes to Richmond and asks for funding, it's always good to know why and what's the story behind it and who does it affect and how does it all fit into the greater good and the greater economy. So those are the types of stories that we feel obligated to tell.
And it's a perspective. My husband and I both have family in Nashville. And Tom's like, we should drive to Nashville. I'm like, I really don't want to drive to Nashville. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, there's a new direct flight from Roanoke to Nashville on Thursdays and Sundays. So I wouldn't mind driving to Roanoke and fly. Tom's like, check that out. Maybe we'll do that. I'm like, yeah, I would much rather drive all the way to Nashville. But again, if no one reports on that, how would anybody know?
Or you could drive to Nashville and stop off in Abington, which has won some national awards for its restaurant scene.
Yes, the Barter Theater. I remember going to the Barter Theater on a field trip when I was in high school to see The Merchant of Venice. There's so much. There's a wealth of things to see in Virginia, and it's interesting to me that Virginians don't always know what's within their own state to see. And we've got parks everywhere. We have some of the best green space. There are festivals in Floyd. There's actually going to be a festival, or has been, in Pound, Virginia too. But why not visit your own state? Why don't you explore your own state instead of going outside your state to find things of interest? We've got really homegrown, wonderful things right here. But I think really people don't know. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And if no one's reporting what you don't know, then you're not out there looking for it. So, Dwayne, moving forward, how do you kind of, so Luanne's talked about getting a K-12 reporter and healthcare reporters and putting people geographically around the state in specific places. You are the executive editor. What does this mean for you as far as managing all of that versus doing a lot of the writing yourself?
Well, right now we're dealing with a lot of freelancers who are all very, very capable, but are not always, available, when we need them. So, if I were to count up all of the freelancers we're working with now, I would probably run out of fingers and toes.
That's great.
So, to have a full-time staff of, 3 more, let's say, in some ways it'd be fewer people than than I'm working with now. And, they would be available. I wouldn't have to be, calling them up, okay, can you do this in such and such a day? Oh, no, sorry, I've got to work then. Well, let me call the next person on the list.
And you point out something interesting about that too, covering specific events like with the legislative session, for instance, versus doing, long form journalism on things that the story you want to tell about counties or community colleges that are not necessarily time critical. They can be turned in. And as you pointed out, there's no printing press to print it and have it on somebody's doorstep. So the content goes live when the content is ready to go live.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, we have to daily be refreshing the content Mondays through Fridays. I mean, there are others who just do weekly content, and that's not us. We have fresh stories every day. And to Dwayne's point, when you're a staffer, you're doing, daily stories or a faster story, one that doesn't take, maybe it is covering a particular event or a smaller piece of something, but you're also juggling these longer in-depth stories, and you're working toward a goal and a timetable, and it helps with planning as to what you have and what you're coming with the freelancers. We've got great freelancers working for us, but they're also working for other people or have other jobs, so there's that bit of instability. Whereas if we have more staffers, then we could plan for bigger, better, more consistent storytelling.
And I noticed too, because I do get your newsletter every day, and I look at the articles, but you also do kind of a roundup, which I think is interesting and is an amazing service to people that say, this is our content, and then here's kind of a roundup of other things. So is that your job, Dwayne?
Yeah, I do that.
You do that?
It's actually one of the most important things I do, because it forces me to look at all the other media in this part of the state, and not just the dailies, which are mostly owned by the same company and have a lot of the same content, but a lot of the weekly papers. There's a surprising amount of reporting taking place at weekly papers. They've always just had one reporter, so they haven't really shrunk. So a few weeks ago, we had a story on the boom in solar energy across Southside. That came out of looking at all the little weekly papers, because every little weekly paper about every week has some story, planning commission, to hear, request for new solar farm, or Board of Zoning Appeals turns down solar farm request. There's no one, though, to connect those dots as, there's something much bigger happening here across the whole region. That's our role, is to connect those dots. But that story really came out of our reading of, lots of little weekly papers to realize, there's a much bigger story taking place there.
And I didn't realize how many small weekly papers there are. Delegate Sam Rasool, I get his newsletter, and at one point I was reading his newsletter, and he had an article, or he had a link to an article in the Roanoke Tribune. And I'm like, what is the Roanoke Tribune? And it's a weekly newspaper. And so I went out there and I looked. Anyway, long story short, I have a subscription to the Roanoke Tribune because I believe in investing in journalism. And the best way to invest in journalism is to pay for it. So I get that every week, and it's a little bitty newspaper. I love reading the Roanoke Tribune. But I just didn't realize that there are probably a lot of papers out there I've never heard of and other people have heard of. But you're doing us a favor because you're reading it, you're plucking out the best parts of that, and then you're doing a roundup to make it easier for all of us to find it.
And the Roanoke Tribune is a black newspaper, and a lot of people would not expect, Roanoke is, predominantly white city on the edge of Appalachia to have a black newspaper, but it's been there for generations now, probably.
I know. And I just, and like I said, I live there and I didn't know that. And what's interesting, going back to Beth Macy, whom I love, huge fan, when she wrote True Vine, she talked about how they put Williamson Road through the Black community. I think it was Williamson Road through the Black community and kind of decimated it. And so you're absolutely right. People don't necessarily think of the Black community in Roanoke as historically having been there really for centuries and having a lot of history of their own. But I had no idea that there was a newspaper out there, and I enjoy reading it. But I really am grateful to you for the fact that you have gathered up some of these other weekly papers spread out. And again, people are doing excellent reporting. People are doing, journalism that matters to their community. And I am, when you look at the bubble map and realize how many people in Richmond, that's a big bubble, are reading your newspaper every day, I'm like, wow, there's hope. I'm feeling really optimistic and hopeful that, people in other places care about reading, about the experience of other communities here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mm-hmm. So going forward, so let me ask you this. We were talking about expanding. Is there a role for young people? I mean, do you see, I know you would need veteran reporters, mm-hmm. but there's a lot of young people who have a tough time breaking into journalism. Are there any opportunities now or in the future for an intern or some young person to learn this kind of journalism?
We've had interns, and I expect we will have interns in the future. We do want in-depth reporting. That generally requires experience, but there are lots of people with experience who can't do in-depth reporting. So,
well, you said that, and I'm going to take your word for it because you would know.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a role for younger people. Just because somebody's young and isn't real seasoned, you can still spot potential. You can spot people who are curious and thoughtful and know to ask the questions and how to write. And both Dwayne and I have mentored younger reporters for years, so that's not a new role for us.
Well, you mentioned the casino story that you liked so much.
Mm-hmm.
That was written by Grace Mammon. She's a student at Washington Lee University who has been one of our freelancers, and come July, she will be our full-time staffer in Danville.
Wow. Well, kudos to her. I love that article, and I shared it.
Yeah.
I shared it. One of the things that they talked about in one of these small towns is that that the casino hosts the weekly Rotary meeting, and I'm a Rotarian, and we're looking for a new place. And I'm like, this casino knows how to be a good community partner. And they're like, yes, come host your Rotary meeting here. I'm like, that's the right attitude to have. And I just would not have considered that aspect of that business and the impact that it can have on small cities. And so I would say that my opinion about casinos has dramatically shifted just based on that article. So kudos to her. I thought it was wonderful reporting and very well done.
Well, a lot of the superficial coverage on casinos has been how many jobs they create as if they are economic development. And, there's certainly jobs to be created there. You can argue whether those are high paying jobs or not. But yeah, a lot of local officials in those cities, they are looking at, okay, here's what the casino can do for us revenue wise to help us achieve other goals. I mean, I had a city council member in Danville talk about how because of the casino coming there, they will be able to achieve some of their capital needs 5 years ahead of schedule.
And that's the story that needs to be told, right? Because back to your idea or your comment about stereotypes, people have an idea about casinos. I personally loathe Las Vegas. It's like the last place on earth I ever want to go. But, I look at Las Vegas and I'm like, it's the best and worst of everything. And it just doesn't appeal to me. And so that's kind of my idea of what a casino is that. And so having a different perspective about how, yes, it does create jobs. And you're right about, are they living wage jobs? I don't know. But that article really showed about how they invested in the community in really important ways, big ways and small ways. And unless somebody tells that story, then the general population doesn't know. And so we're all formulating an opinion based on very, very limited amount of information. And to me, Cardinal News is filling such an important role in Virginia. And that's why I wanted to do a show with you both, is that I want people here in Northern Virginia and everywhere in Virginia to understand that this is the best journalism about where we live. And it will change your mind it will open your eyes. Like I said, the article on quilting and how it was written, it respected the people in those communities, and it told the story of someone's journey to try to connect with a community that was kind of suspicious of outsiders. And that's a viewpoint I think a lot of Virginians have, is that, we're outsiders. If we go down to Southern Virginia, they're going to look at you and say, you're not from here. Believe me, I know. You're not from here. But the fact of the matter is that article just showed something really beautiful about Appalachia, about arts and crafts, about the lost stories of the people who worked in the coal fields. And that is the kind of journalism that is uplifting, and it makes me optimistic, and it makes me hopeful that places in Virginia have a wonderful future. In ROVA, rest of Virginia, should be eradicated from our vocabulary. These places have names. There are counties like Wise, and there are places like Pound, and there's Danville and Martinsville and Bristol. And people need to understand the geography of their own commonwealth. And I just think you both are doing such a huge service to bring this for free. I mean, you don't even have to pay to subscribe to cardinalnews.org. And so I hope our viewers are gonna go and check out the journalism that you're producing. It's such quality stories. In the last couple of minutes we have, any parting thoughts that either one of you have?
Yeah, just one. And I do hope that everyone goes to cardinalnews.org and checks us out. And the one thing that we didn't mention is that when we started this, during our very first meeting, what we set our standard, that we wanted to be transparent. We're nonpartisan. We're not obligated to anyone, and we do rely solely on donations, just like public broadcasting does. And so each week we update our list of who's given us money. So everyone who's given us anything, we list on our website so that people know who's funding us.
Wow. Transparency, we could use a lot more of that. And Dwayne wrote a wonderful article on civility too, which I also loved very much, and about how we need more of that in our politics and everywhere else. So I want to thank you both for being here on Inside Scoop. For our viewers at home, if you want to look at about a decade's worth of past shows on Inside Scoop, you can find us at youtube.com/Inside Scoop TV. And this show will be joining the many others on YouTube, which has the half-life of plutonium out there, which means that our discussion here today will never be lost.
Oh, no.
I know, right? Thank you so much, Dwayne. Thank you so much, Luanne. And I encourage you all to check out cardinalnews.org. And that's what we have for you tonight on Inside Scoop. We're on Mondays at 8 p.m. on Channel 10.